Um, Hi, yes, so I'm Josie. I am a sports psychologist. I work with lots of junior tennis players, most often either because they haven't got the confidence that they feel they need on the court, or that they're losing emotional control on the court, and their parents would like some techniques to be able to control those emotions a little bit better when they're in tricky moments. So we're going to focus on the confidence side today, but we will also cover some elements that come up about why somebody might lose a little bit of emotional control. And we've got some time at the end that if you want to ask any questions that come up around that, we can absolutely do that too. Let me find. Brilliant. So I love this picture. I think it illustrates confidence so well, because particularly what I see is working with lots of athletes from kind of juniors through to those that are competing at the Olympics on world tours, is that everybody kind of thinks we're winging it. There is a huge amount of imposter syndrome. I think when I did it was just a Twitter poll and it had about 600-700 responses, but 91% of people came back and said they felt like an imposter at some point. And actually, the imposters are the people I feel quite comfortable with. I think if you've got some of that imposter syndrome, you're probably doing the right thing. It's the people that have none of the imposter syndrome we should probably worry about a little bit more. They probably don't have that self-awareness going on. So I really like this idea of we are all winging it a little bit. We're all kind of trying to put on that confidence. But when we can grasp it, probably not trying to get 10 out of 10 for confidence, probably about 9. When we've got it, it makes a huge amount of difference to how well we can perform. And not just how well we actually perform on the court, but how good we feel about doing it. A lot of the stress, we might perform well, but actually if we've spent the whole thing with our stomach all bunched up and we felt tight and it felt like we were forcing everything on there, then actually that's when we stop enjoying our sport. So we want to help raise really confident athletes. My little one's probably younger than most on this call. Mine's only 6, but the joy I see when she's really up for doing something and she kind of strides off with like, I can handle this, is amazing. As a parent, it puts lots of the doubts out of my mind. So the more we can work on helping get our athletes confident, the better they feel, the better they perform, the more they enjoy it. We also know from research that confidence is the biggest differentiator between success and not being quite as successful in high-level sports. So the more we can do as parents to help nudge our children towards that, the better. So what we'll do tonight is talk a little bit about confidence, the things that tend to stop it. The biggest thing is anxiety and worries. So we'll talk about those worries and what's going on in the brain when that happens. And then we'll look at 5 specific techniques that I use all the time with athletes and that you can just cut and paste and use with your children. And we're going to do a couple tonight that you guys can do, because actually they're all helpful for all of us. But there'll be really nice things that you can sit down with your children, particularly if it's over Easter holidays, and actively do something together that will help them. And they tend to be quite physical, so they really like these. So this is a little quiz I often give junior athletes to kind of think about where they might be in their confidence scale. When I work on camps, we'll talk about confidence. The kids are often like, I want to be 10 out of 10 confident. I want to be 100%, because they know that's what they're supposed to say. Actually, that's rarely going to happen. And we probably don't want them at that 100%, because that's when we stop doing those little bits that actually make the really big difference. But I like this list. It's 10 kind of questions where we ask them to score between 1 and 10. And obviously 10 would give 100%. Most people tend to be around probably about 50 to 60%. That's what I find is normal. So that's absolutely fine. There's things to work on there, absolutely, but we shouldn't be worried. it's if your child is looking at these and coming out with 20-30%, that then it's really good idea to spend some time really working with them on their confidence. And quite helpful maybe for you as sports parents to look at this and going, oh, how well do I perform under the pressure of being a sports parent when it feels like it's gone really badly for them and they're having a tantrum, and how well am I able to handle that? How well can I squash my self-doubt about whether they can actually do it? And we can see where we sit as parents on our confidence. So you'll get these slides afterwards, but this is quite a helpful little way of kind of gauging where your confidence levels might be, and maybe something to start the chat with your child about where do they feel their confidence levels are. So I would love, if you guys don't mind, to put into the chat box what you think kind of blocks your child's confidence. What is that thing that tends to be getting in the way? Would anyone mind putting something through?
See what we get. Someone's got to put something.
Oh, thank you, Shannon. My child hates being the centre of attention. Oh, I'm with you there, Shannon. Mine does too. I don't want to be seen as showing off, is the phrase we get. And that's tough when you're really good at something. Struggles with other parents watching. Yeah, I've had that a lot. Fear of losing is a huge one. Nervous when winning. Yes, we will come to that, Jimmy. It becomes self-fulfilling that others will catch up. Yeah, it's one of the things that tennis players of all ages say. They feel like they're doing fine unless they're supposed to be winning. And then suddenly it thinks they're going to be caught out, and that adds loads of stress to it. And fear of losing the point. Brilliant. Thank you for those. Yeah, they're all really common ones that we see. The other ones that we know from research tend to stop them feeling as confident as they can, even though they might not necessarily be able to put that into words. Feeling like it's their first time doing something, so they haven't got specific experience of something around this, i.e. not having played at this level before, not having played at this club before, not having played in this type of tournament before. Those firsts can bring kind of a real lack of confidence. Lack of preparation is a huge one. And they may actually have done a lot of preparation, but they may have heard from somebody else that they've done far more. And so they may start doubting what they have done. What lots of yours mention there is when it's outcome focused. And I think tennis is one of the hardest sports psychologically because it's so black and white in terms of outcomes. It's not like running where you could get close to a PB or you could come quite high up against other people, even in a small field or even in a huge field. It's so black and white, and the rankings are so clear, and the looking through the who you're playing and figuring out whether you should win or you're likely to lose to that person. I mean, psychologically, it's really, really difficult because of those outcome focuses. So what I spend a lot of time working with all tennis players on is how to focus on the processes that will make them a great player so that they have slightly less attention and panic because of the outcome focused, i.e. the fear of losing. And it's that analysing others that tends to break down confidence as well, of looking through the start list and I'm playing him, I've always lost to him, he's really good, and fixating on certain people. They're supposed to be better than me, they're ranked higher, and that tends to diminish quite a lot of confidence. So what I thought would be helpful is to think about where our confidence comes from in our heads. And this is helpful for understanding what our brain is doing when we're trying to play high-level tennis or any level tennis. And you might recognise these from your day-to-day lives too. So I like to talk about the brain as having 3 kind of zones. This is not neuroscientifically correct. Our brains don't have zones. They don't have any elements like that. They're basically networks of something like 128 billion neurons. But the way they connect in hubs to do certain things for us. And if we think about one of those hubs is very much focused around habits. And we love habits for athletes. That is why they play and they practice over and over and over again. it takes, I think the latest research is 66 days to make a habit. And that can be a nice thing to remind your child if they're getting panicked about, oh, I've been working on this and I haven't quite got it. No, something you've been doing for 2 weeks before a tournament is not going to have stuck well enough to be able to do it when they're feeling under pressure in the tournament. And we shouldn't expect them to. Absolutely, if they can get it out, fabulous. But we shouldn't have any pressure on that. It does take a long time to build a habit. And we want those habits because every day, each of us has to make about 35,000 decisions, some scientists figured out. And most of those decisions are not ones we have time to physically make, particularly if you're playing a tennis match. You want most of what you do to go under the radar and just happen automatically without you thinking about it. We love the habit zone, and we want to put as much as we possibly can of our tennis that we're doing in practice into the habit zone so we can do a lot of it without proactively thinking when we're in a match or a tournament. Then we've got a logic zone. So actually this is more of an area. This tends to be located in our prefrontal cortex. It's the part of our brain that does lots of the thinking and decision making for us. And it's very closely linked to your hippocampus, which is where knowledge, memory, learning is all stored. So when you're playing and there's suddenly a much bigger decision to be made in your match, this is what you need to switch on and use. And it will drill back into your hippocampus and it'll be able to work out, last time somebody shot a ball in that direction, I tried this, it didn't work, and my coach suggested this, so I'm going to try that instead. And it'll be done in a millisecond. But you've had that thought process, you've made usually a good decision if you've been training well. So we love that part, but we can't use it too much. We get really tired using that too much, and we only have a certain amount of concentration. So we kind of want to draw upon that when it's really necessary. And if us and our kids just had those two zones going on, they would be beautiful tennis players with loads of confidence, and we would never have any tears or any stress before or after matches. However, their brains are not designed to be brilliant tennis players. Can anyone pop into the chat box what their brain is designed for? Or what our brains are designed for? What is the fundamental reason that our bodies have a brain?
If we get anybody answering.
Survival. Well done, Shannon and Ruth.
That's
Thank you. Yes, totally. Our brains are designed for survival. And they have many, many ways they do that. But one of the best descriptions I've heard of it recently is actually, in order to do that, they're prediction machines. And so our brain likes to try and predict all the things that could possibly go wrong so that it can figure out how to save us and help us survive. So in order to do that, we have a very specific part of our brain called the amygdala. Much easier to think of it as a threat zone. And actually, athletes tend to think of it as, this is my threat zone, is switched on. When it switches on, tends to be because there is a physical threat. We don't have many of those day to day. Although I do have some juniors saying, could I just get my amygdala taken out? And I was like, physically no, but it's very deep in your brain. But even if we did, all it means is you would leave my clinic and you'd get run over outside because you wouldn't have the forethought of those cars are dangerous and you'll get run over. Mm-hmm. And actually for physical threat, it's very helpful. It keeps us alive. It keeps us surviving. Problem is we have psychological threats too. And those can really trigger our threat zone. And so losing, if you're really focused on winning, is a big psychological threat. Losing when you totally feel like a tennis player, when everything about who you are is tennis, it's a really big threat if you might lose. Because if you lose a match, are you really a tennis player anymore? Perfection. If you're a perfectionist, and it doesn't have to be perfection in general, I have lots of parents say, oh no, they're not a perfectionist. Their room is an absolute tip. And I'm like, yeah, they don't care about the room. But when they care about tennis, if they're a perfectionist, you'll absolutely know about it. And if they haven't played perfectly, which they never will because it's totally impossible to play perfectly, that will feel like a really big threat to them. So we have lots of different threats that come up psychologically, and tournaments and matches really tend to kind of be part of that threat system. When that threat system triggers, because they've just remembered they've got a match, or they've arrived at the club and suddenly it's very real, or they've scrolled through the list and they can see they're playing their biggest nemesis, it triggers two chemicals to flood their bodies, adrenaline and cortisol. And they go to help us either fight, don't tend to get many fights, although I've seen a few with parents at tournaments, but I've never seen the kids fighting before matches. The kids with the fight response tend to get very talkative. They're the ones that really, really want to talk. We get the flight. So they're the kids that actually don't show up for tournaments. They might do training and practice, but they're not interested in tournaments at all. What we tend to notice with those that have a very strong threat zone is that they get what we call freeze. They shut down, they get very, very quiet. They don't want anyone to talk to them. They just want to be alone. And you'll know you've got one of those if you're the parent that gets sent to the cafe and you're not really allowed to like talk to them before matches. They go deeply silent and they want you away. You might well have a freeze response there. There's also a fourth one to really look out for, which is fawn. And that tends to be like the walking on eggshells, the people pleaser types. We see those when athletes have had abusive coaches in the past. So when they've had coaches, I often get gymnasts and I'll talk about, they had an old school coach. And that tends to me, they're walking on eggshells. They're terrified of ever doing anything wrong. So the chemicals flood our bodies so we can do one of those four responses. And they tend to have quite a physical response on our body. So I'm going to show you these. These are the ones we tend to see. 5 main ones. Nauseous tummy. Our brain and our gut is incredibly closely connected. And so when people talk about butterflies, like fighting in your tummy, or I've had athletes that will throw up before tournaments, lots of people just want to go to the toilet a lot. But we really tend to feel some of those nerves, that lack of confidence in our tummy. Then we will also get increased heart rate and increased breathing rate. And that's not going to be good because they've got quite long matches to play. If your heart and your breathing rate are quite high before 100-meter sprint, not the end of the world. They're only running for like 15 seconds. And if they've got a couple of hours of matches to play, that's much more harmful for them. So we really want those slow at the beginning, not racing. This is the big one for tennis players. They get tight back and shoulder muscles. And I find it fascinating to be able to watch matches where you can see you can almost see the thought bubble coming out of their head of, I'm doing well, they might overtake me, or I'm going to lose this, or I can't afford to lose this, or what happens if? Because suddenly they can no longer serve as well. And I imagine as a parent, you're watching it kind of frustrated that you're like, we're doing so well, what's going on? And it's that they've got that very tight back and shoulder muscle and they just can't send the ball where they needed to. They put the same amount of effort through the racket, but it's not going where it's supposed to. The final one is a loss of peripheral vision and we lose some of our senses. So not such an issue actually in tennis. Much more of an issue in, say, a sport like rugby, where you might have a 6'4" guy coming in from the side that you didn't notice because you were feeling anxious. So we can usually get away with it in tennis, but it's worth noting that actually you might try and talk to them. Because everything's focused on escaping the scary thing, they can't hear you. They're not noticing. And even notice in kind of day to day, if your kid kicks off about anything at home and you're trying to talk logic to them and you're trying to explain why something might be happening, they cannot hear you. They cannot take it in because they cannot use that front part of the brain. They can't do the decision, the logical bit, because the amygdala is pure emotion. And so the emotional bit has taken control. It doesn't matter how you try and negotiate with them. Until they've calmed down, they're not going to be listening. And I certainly find that as a parent, it's quite helpful to remember at times of like, there's no point right now. Let them calm and let them chill, and then we'll have a proper conversation. So If I am interested, not from your child, but from you, I would love to know when you're feeling anxious as parents, or in your own world, in your work, if you've got a presentation or a test, what do you notice in your body? And I don't know whether you can put multiple things into one of these polls. So if you could tick in the thing you notice most as your first, and definitely put that one in. See if you can put in any others. But what tends to come up for you? What do you notice most?
Interesting.
Brilliant. Cool. So we've got nauseous tummy is the most common. Yeah, we all that feeling of butterflies in the tummy, and I'm working with lots of marathon runners at the moment because we had Paris a few weekends ago. We've got Manchester, and then we've got London coming up, and everyone's just like, I cannot eat in the morning. And I imagine many of you have struggles of trying to get your child to eat before a tournament because the tummy just feels clenched and horrible. You can notice your heart rate go up. Absolutely. If you've got things like Garmin watches, you can actively see it. And similarly with high breathing rate. And that's a nice one because at least when that one comes up for you, there are breathing techniques you can do to slow it down, and it helps break the cycle. I think this might be a really nice slide to be able to chat through your child with. And when you have that kind of car conversation in the way, to be able to go, oh, you're noticing this? What do you notice? And I don't think they do it very naturally when they're younger. So often in a first session with an athlete, I will ask them about this. And I don't think I have any of those. And they'll come back a week later and went, right, well, I noticed this and then I noticed this. And when they've looked out for it, they've really been able to see how it works in their body. And it can then become their early warning system. Oh, I'm not feeling as confident as I should. Can I use my confidence jar? Shall we do my confidence booster? And they can start to pick the right tools. So, the things that tend to make our threat zone almost like highly flammable, most likely to explode, values being violated. And I will do a lot of work with athletes individually, even really little ones, on what their values are and what matters to them. But something that comes up over proportionately in junior tennis players is a value of fairness. I think this comes up a lot with juniors anyway, but for some reason in tennis, it feels very strong. And when they've got tournaments where they won't necessarily have an umpire over them and those walking around, and they might be playing people who maybe inadvertently or maybe purposely do dodgy line calls, they can really lose it very, very quickly. Whereas if your value wasn't fairness, it was compassion or fun, you'd be okay with that. They'd be able to shrug it off. But someone with a value of fairness who has somebody cheating will really lose it very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. And you will be able to watch the change in their body structure, the tension, the loss of peripheral vision, and they'll really struggle to be able to perform after that. Perfectionism is a huge one. If they've got that voice in their head saying, I must be perfect. If I am not perfect, I am not who I believe I am. As soon as they can't be perfect, they will start to lose it in a match. The overly strong identity. I am a tennis player. If I screw up my tennis, there is something wrong with me. It feels incredible. It's not a bad tennis match. It's a failure as a person. And they take it very, very personally. Being in a judgmental environment, and that can be if they're in a certain club, particularly if they've got people around the same age that do lots of the same competitions, and it feels very competitive, that can be very tricky for them. Feeling like they're not particularly psychologically safe. So if they have any coaching where failure is not really tolerated, it's expected to be done first time, that can leave them very fearful about trying new things or risking stuff. Whereas when they're in a coaching environment where failure can sometimes almost be celebrated because it meant they tried something different, or they were really brave with what they did. They have much more psychological safety, and they know they're not going to be ostracized for messing up a tournament, and they're still going to be welcomed back. They're less likely to trigger. And expectations. I find it fascinating that often young athletes will say, oh, my parents expect me to do well. They have invested so much money. They've invested so much time every weekend taking me to tournaments, after school every night going along to things. I have to do well to pay them back. And yet I have never, ever had a single parent say that they think that their child needs to do well to pay them back. Every parent says to me, I just want my child to know they're loved and enjoy their tennis. But somehow that message doesn't always get received in the right way. And I think sometimes the athlete's own expectations really pull in with, I so want to make my mum and dad proud. And that can be quite tricky. Right. Next poll. Oh, reset. Will that work?
I can start it.
Cool. It should be up. Oh, publish.
There we go.
Cool. So, which one do you notice most in your child?
And it seems as though you can just mark one. So, whichever there's the most.
The strongest thing there for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so they tend to match what I see in juniors too. Values being violated and feeling expectations of others, and really wanting to live up to it and wanting to make their coach proud, and things that, oh, I'll end it so you can see what came up. There you go. Yeah, there's this real desperate need to do well for others, which is lovely. It's really nice to see they've given me all this. I really want to make them proud, but that can cause them quite a lot of that kind of threat zone enablers, that they're losing some of their confidence because they're focused on that and not focused on just playing brilliant tennis. Cool. Thank you for feeding in, everyone. And just because there's a threat zone enabler there doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get triggered. So you could go off to a tournament with high expectations from others. They might have left with their coach going, I know you can do this. I expect a brilliant win from you, which we can have words about because it's not a particularly helpful thing to say to them. But they can go off with that. They could be really perfectionistic. They could be playing someone that they know cheats a bit, and they'll still be absolutely fine. Usually until one of these things pops up. So the threat zone triggers that we tend to see the most: low blood sugar levels. And you won't be able to see this, but if you reflect on it, you might start to notice when it happens. But it is the biggest trigger of our amygdala because our brain is 2 to 5% of our body weight. It takes 20% of the energy that we put in our body. Making 128 billion neurons work and connect is incredibly energy resourceful. It uses a lot of energy. So we use about 20% of the energy we put in our body to go to our brain. And it's basically glucose. That's what it loves. It sucks up glucose. So you'll notice if people go on diets or suddenly they cut out sugar, they will be incredibly grumpy because it's very hard to use the prefrontal cortex when you're in that place. It's just all about the emotion and they'll snap very quickly. So low blood sugar is an important one. Things like energy gels can be really helpful for you guys, or cereal bars, orange juice, things for you guys to have in bags if you start to notice your child getting really close to the edge on that. Tiredness is a big one. And that's why often you'll see athletes start to fall apart towards the end of matches, because they are, especially when they're younger, they are genuinely tired. Hunger does it. There's some brilliant research about, I mean, not nice, but judges, when they're making decisions over trials and the punishments that they give to people in court are much harsher just before lunch, and they're much kinder just after lunch, because they know that when people are hungry, they don't make nice decisions. They're not able to control their emotions in the same way. Deadlines coming up for things, not necessarily even tennis deadlines, but if they've got deadlines at schools for things, that adds that extra bit of pressure. Lack of preparation, when they know they haven't done what they were supposed to do, and they know they've kind of done 80% of it or skimped on practice, that's when they might trigger. And recent failures. Because our brains are designed for survival and to keep us safe, they remember the negatives much, much stronger than the positives. And that's why we'll go into one of the specific techniques in a minute. We want them to be able to try and remember the positives. But it means any failures that are there, they will remember so much stronger than when they've done really well. And so if you've had a run of recent failures, it will feel much more catastrophic to them than it might actually be. They might have been playing great tennis, but been playing some brilliant people, or stepped up a level recently. But their brain will remember it because their brain wants them to stay safe. It wants them to stay safe by not playing tennis. So it'll give them lots of messaging about, you don't want to do this. Why don't you play as quick as possible and get it out of the way? Why don't you procrastinate? Why don't you just speed this bit up so you don't have to play anymore? Get it done and out the way. Do the safe moves. All those messages will come because their brain's trying to keep them safe. So one final poll. I would love to know what you guys see as the biggest kind of threat in your child. Tiredness, yes. Oh God, the 5 o'clock at night thing. I mean, my daughter's only 6, but that's the kind of the witching hour in our house.
Yeah.
And that's where thinking about, if you're doing particularly afternoon tournaments or ones that go on into the evening, of how are you going to manage that tiredness, because it will mean that they're much less able to perform in the way that they might want to, and they haven't learned to handle tiredness, or they don't have the options like we do with things like caffeine. So helping them with that is really important.
We've also had another one say, Shannon says as well, it's heat exhaustion. So
yes.
Tiredness, heat exhaustion.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for adding that. Yeah. So really being able to look at the scenario that your child is going into and going, oh, what might trigger them here? It could, and the other one probably is also certain competitors. Yeah. I've never found a tennis child yet that couldn't tell me who their nemesis is. And they might, on the front of it, be friends with them. Yeah. But they're sort of a frenemy, because there's definitely that. I really like Jack. Can we play together? I really, really want to beat him. That kind of thing comes up a lot. Okay. So that's kind of all the background. What we want to do is give you some tools to be able to develop with your children that can help them have much more of that positive brain. So it quietens down a lot of those doubts and those thoughts and the stuff that their brain's coming up with to try and keep them safe. This helps them remember why they are there, what they're doing, what they really, really want to work on, why it's important that they do that work. The first one is my favorite thing. Don't worry, I'm not asking you to give them a jar full of sweets, but we do want to give them a jar, and we want to give them 21 little pieces of paper. And this is a really nice job to do together. I've done this with my 6-year-old, and we sit and create our own. And it's nice for you guys to have one too. But it's kind of our fake brain, because our real brain likes to tell us all the negative, unhelpful stuff to keep us safe. So we want them to have lots of positive, happy, confidence boosting things that remind them that they can do this thing, however scary it might seem, just before they're about to go on court. And they're not all fluffy, positive stuff, but they're all little messages to themselves, reminding them that they've got this, they can handle it. It is harder when they're younger because they haven't got so many years of experience. So you might need to help them a little bit more with this. But what we want you to come up with are 4 setbacks that they have gone through, ideally in tennis, but it can also be things in school or in life, and get them to think about how they coped with it, how they handled it, what they learned from it. So it could be injury comes up a huge amount. COVID is always a good one because nobody's life was untouched by COVID. So how did they handle the changes that they had? It could have been a test they messed up at school. It could have been a friend that they fell out with. It could have been their coach moving away and having to change coaches. It could have been something changing in the family relationships. But thinking about 4 setbacks they've had and the fact that they handled it and they're still here and they've survived it. What was it that gave them that? Because it helps them remember when they're on court. Okay, it's a setback. They've just got to set ahead. But I can handle setbacks. This is something I can do. We then want 4 difficult things that they've done. So something when they looked at it went, oh, I'll never be able to do that. But they did it. So they don't even have to be big things, but 4 things you can remind them. Oh, you didn't think you would be able to take your SATs, and you did. You didn't think you'd be able to walk in to your new tennis club when you got there because it felt too scary and daunting, but you did it. So reminding them they can do difficult things. This bit's the nice bit. 4 achievements that they have got. And that can be you won that tennis trophy. That can be you got Star of the Week at school the other day. You got a certificate at the end of term for your kindness, whatever those are. But 4 achievements, usually things they've achieved, like certificates or trophies or stuff that feels quite substantial to you. Then we've got 4 strengths that they've noticed in themselves. If they really do lack confidence, you might really need to help them with that bit of 4 strengths that you see within them or that their coach has told you about them. Then 4 things other people have said about them. And this is the bit that their faces really light up when you think about, oh, my coach said, somebody the other day in session said something like, my coach says, I always show up. Whatever is going on, I will always show up and I am consistent. And they could just see that, like, that's something that they valued and somebody else had recognized it in it. If you can, within the family, you could get them to ask each of you. So, Mum, what do you think I'm good at? Dad, what do you think? Ask a sibling, ask the coach. That's a really nice thing to put in. And then the final piece of paper you have, this is the one they will look at me cringing that I'm horrible and make them ask. One thing you love about yourself. And it really forces them to pull out the thing that they're most proud of. And it's really lovely. And it gives you a really nice conversation starter. If they're anxious before a tournament, you love the fact that you're diligent and determined. So what are you going to go and do today? Well, I'll be diligent and determined. And they get to focus on the thing they're best at. And then they have a real strengths focus when they go into that tournament. So it becomes just a little jar they keep by their bed in their kit bag. But it's a really nice thing they can pull out if they're not feeling confident to look back through. And I love it. My athletes send me photos of their little jars. I create test tubes for them. So they're very light so they can fly with them. But they send them from around the world in their kit bags on random courts, which is brilliant to see because they're using it all the time as this is my fake brain that tells me all the stuff I need to remember. So I'd say if you go away and do anything from tonight, it should be creating that jar. The next one. I've taken this from a presentation I'm doing for London Marathon the day before, because lots of people sent me brilliant little ways they show their own mantras. And I just thought it was so nice and visual that if you have a motivational mantra, which every athlete should, there are different ways you can get it across. I'm not going to suggest that any of your children get tattoos, I promise. But But this was a runner came to me saying that she'd actually got hers tattooed on her arm. She thought it was quite extreme, but it works for her. She looks down in a marathon, she's got those messages. What lots of kids do is just write something on their hand. Or I often give them little wristbands, the ones you get at festivals and things that you can write on.
Yeah.
And we'll write a little message to themselves on there. This guy, Pete, he had his pace numbers down his arms, but what he got was his 2 kids to draw little smiley faces on his thumbs. No. So that when he looked down running the marathon, he could see these little smiley faces from his kids. And I was like, that was such a nice way to remember the stuff that matters to you. And that could be a really nice one, that on their thumb, some part of their hand, you draw a little message, or you draw a smiley face, or you draw a confidence button for them that they can just press when they're not feeling confident. It's like, Mum or Dad are here with me. The shoes have a little message on it. It says, have a great run. I love the idea. You look down at your shoes and you got a little message from someone. And these are the gels that I used for Paris Marathon a couple of weeks ago. And they were brilliant. Every time I pulled one out of my pocket, I had a different message from somebody in my life that made me smile. They were all ones that made me giggle. And it was brilliant to kind of like, I'm not alone out here. I've got people on my side. And what I talk about this quite a lot on Twitter, and a football coach from one of the big Premiership academies messaged me and said, we've been using this at half time. So it's really hard to get messages to the players at half time that they're actually going to listen to. But when we take the gels out for them, we can give each of them an individual message stuck on it. They feel really special because it's a bit different. They read it and they can take it in. So it can be quite a nice way to get messages over to your kids, that if they get a little break and they're taking anything like a gel or a couple of Haribo or something, that they've got a little message there. The message should be something positive, should always be something that moves them forward. And it should be not necessarily instructional, that you need to stretch more or have faster feet on court. Should be remembering why they play. And again, that's a really nice conversation to be able to have with them. Why do you play tennis? Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you have to miss parties because you've got a tournament or you've got training, or you can't do this after school with your friends because you've got practice. Why? What's your reason for it? And I don't think we need to be adults to really think about that. I think the more we can help our children remember, the biggest thing they always tell me, it's fun. So any way we can help them remember it's supposed to be fun through some of these silly things, that really helps. But really helping them think about, why are they doing this? Because it can be really hard, but we want them to have that little message. This one's another lovely thing to do, and it's called Stars in the Dark. And I must need an account with Hobbycraft because the amount of bits of paper and stamps and everything I buy from them. But I literally get a piece of black card and I've got a stamper to cut out stars, and we will write on them different little things to remind them why they love playing tennis. So this was one I did for running, but I'm like, I love my easy Sunday runs. I'm proud of what I achieved in this. I've got a good sprint finish. So you're reminding yourself of your strengths. Well, they're reminding themselves of their strengths. They're reminding themselves of why they do it. They're reminding themselves of the support they've got. And just sticking something like this on their bedroom wall, it's a really nice little thing to have that reminds them when they look up, I'm doing this for a reason. There's good stuff that comes with this. It's not all the scary bits, and it's the stuff that gives them the confidence. So that can be a nice one to try. And you can just do it with a piece of paper and some star shapes. You don't have to go full out Hobbycraft. And then these 2 final ones I use with every athlete before a tournament. I've been working on them all day with athletes that are going off to big national trials for rowing today. I will always use one before any race that matters to me. And I think it's an incredible way to help you focus not on the outcomes, focus on the inputs. And the more they focus on the inputs, the more those inputs are controllable, and the happier they will feel with what they do. So they'll feel more confident, because you can feel confident, I can control inputs. You've got no hope with outputs. There's just too many things that engage. And it helps them keep really nice track of their improvements over time. So the goal is probably the hardest thing for them to come up with, because the rule with it is it cannot be to win. Because as soon as the goal is to win, the risk is that they lose, and they can't control that, and they go into the threat zone. So they will come up with to win, because of course that's what they want. But our job as parents is to really help them think about, well, what will help you win? What processes might help you? Is that having a really strong serve? Is that having very fast feet on court? Is that being able to react really quickly? Is it being able to use X shots that you've been practicing with your coach? That becomes the goal. So the thing that will help them win is the goal, not winning in itself, because winning just causes a load of stress for them and means they're less likely to win. When they focus on the process, much more likely to win, and without all of the stress. So it's not that we don't want them to win, we want them to think about the way that they win and how they do that instead. Coach on a shoulder, sometimes they might have a coach there with them, but actually we want them to be quite resourceful. So if their coach isn't, what's the thing their coach tends to tell them when their performance starts to go downhill? And that's usually quite instructional. For me as a runner, it's usually head up. Most of my tennis players say, oh, it's fast feet. I need to move faster across the court. Like, brilliant. They know it. I've never had anyone not know what it would be. They've listened enough to know. And they usually roll their eyes because it's been said so often. That would be in there. 3 strengths. And that you can take from their confidence jar or their stars in the dark that they've done. 3 things that will really help them in that tournament. 3 sessions they've done recently. So that could be other matches they've played or practice sessions or even drills that they've done that they did really well. Their motivational mantra, that little message they want to remember when it's tough. That's kind of this is why I am doing this. And this is a really good question to ask them. I perform at my best when? Because it helps them think about, do they want to be calm beforehand? Do they like to be a bit pumped up? Do they like other people around them? Do they like total quiet? Do they like to feel really well fueled? You can really pull it apart of like, what do they like? And if they don't know, that's the question that you can work on with them as you go into tournaments. How did you feel beforehand? Was that helpful for you? Was that not? So they're really shaping early on from a young age. I know I've got the self-awareness of how I perform well. And the final one, so I sell these as postcards or give them to my clients as postcards. This is on one side. And the other side is the analysis of that match. And we call it win or learn. There must be a better name because I don't really want win in it. But it's the idea that no match should ever be wasted. We don't ever want an athlete walking away, throwing their racket, going, well, that was a total waste of time. Why did I bother? Because we want them to see that even if it was awful, they can still learn from it. And the whole point is using these tournaments as ways to learn rather than feeling like they have to be the outcome and the end of it. And so we asked them what went well, what didn't go well. And ideally, you have the same amount of points in each. So we're looking for probably 3 or 4 things. So even if they had an awesome match and they won the tournament, we still want them thinking about, yes, didn't do that perfectly, or I could have done that better. So we then asked them, well, what are you going to continue doing? Because even if it was awful, there will be some stuff they did well that we want to make sure they keep within their repertoire. What will you do differently? And an action plan. And that's the really important one. They start to own their tennis. So when they go into their next practice session, they can say to their coach, I would like to work on this today, please. Because this is the thing I noticed I wasn't doing well enough at the weekend's tournament. And they really start to own and have that ownership for it. So they're constantly moving forward. Okay. So I didn't leave quite enough time for questions, so I meant to. But I would love to hear any.
Yes. I think if we can pop any in the chat box, if anything that's coming up. I noticed there was someone was saying as well that there's a lot of sweating in terms of that feeling of when the panic sets on or their confidence starts to decrease is, all of the physical signs, the sweating, the heart rate. So that's interesting that's come up so many times.
And the more as parents you can notice what their signs are,
Yes.
the easier it can be not to step in necessarily, but to be there for them. So that you can give the right environment for them, so that you're adding absolutely no extra stress to them, and you're helping them find the coping mechanisms that work for them.
Yes, absolutely. Another question: what age do you typically find confidence becoming an issue, and is there differences between the sexes?
Oh, what a brilliant question, David. I don't find there's an age per se. I tend to find it's much more personality types. I am probably quite biased on this because my specialism is performance anxiety, and I notice the people who tend to get the most performance anxiety have two traits in common. They are highly intelligent and they're perfectionistic. And so you can spot this from 2 or 3 year olds, actually. You can see the kids that are asking very intelligent questions from a young age, but do not want to finish their colouring until it's perfect, or will literally throw the pens across the table because they went outside the lines in their colouring. They are the kids that are more likely to have confidence as an issue, because confidence is just on the other end of anxiety. And so we need to diminish as much of the anxiety elements as we can to be able to have those confidence ones. So we tend to have those personality traits that tend to influence it quite a lot. But it can also be when we start to take competitions more seriously, when kids start going off for different levels of competitions, and those kind of things. And then when they start mixing, like when they go up an age group and suddenly they're mixing with people that are 2 years older, particularly in puberty. If a child's quite young to go through puberty, they might be absolutely flying through their age category, and you'll have someone that hasn't even started and is 2 years younger. And there can be quite a big disparity. And so I'll often get kids that come who've lost all confidence, and particularly kids that have gone to like private schools on sports scholarships for things like tennis, because everyone else has suddenly caught up with them. And until they go through puberty, they're not going to jump up again. So that tends to be the biggest issue. Differences between sexes, I think, is really interesting. I tend to see higher levels of confidence of girls in girls' schools, rather than girls in mixed schools. So I'd say if somebody's in a mixed school, the girls will have lower levels of confidence than the boys, because they tend to get shouted down more often when stuff is going on, and they tend to have sport, whole culture of society as sport is less for girls. Whereas when they're in a girls only school, there is less of that, and so the confidence tends to flourish a bit more for longer.
That's probably interesting in terms, I know when I was younger playing, you were always you weren't just like girls on one side, boys on another side, you were mixed. So that probably also can play a part into, as you say, the confidence building when you're in mixed groups, maybe than if you're in individual lessons, or you could play really well if you're just with your coach who you're comfortable with, but then you go into a wider group and maybe you're not the best, or you're not feeling like you're the best, and then all of a sudden that confidence, even in training, can diminish a little bit more.
And I see it a lot when somebody may well be the very best in their club, and then they get picked to do county training, and suddenly they're not the best anymore, and that's quite a big shocker. Or then you go on to something else and you're like, whoa, everybody else here is as good as me, and I'm not used to that. So that can be a really big kind of shock to the system, and confidence can massively fall at that point. So really important for parents at that point to be able to help with things like reminding them why they should be confident, and reminding them of the scenario they're in. Well, yeah, you've stepped up to the next level. Everyone's good here. What's great about playing good people? And pull out the positive side of that, rather than well, now I'm not winning all the time element that your child is likely to be focused on.